There's a clip going around from a high dollar conference that most people have never heard of, and I want you to watch it, not because it's entertaining, but because it explains something you probably felt for a long time without having the words for it. A former governor says something completely obvious that blue run cities have an affordability crisis too. And maybe it's time to look in the mirror. And the guy who ran Chicago for years completely loses it. That reaction right there is the whole story. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and check this out.
What's going to happen in November, and it's going to come as a big shock to you. People don't like corruption. They don't like the White House looking like eBay. And you have sold, if it ain't nailed down, you've sold everything. And they don't like a set of politics that goes from the rule of law to the rule of one man. And they're going to reject crony capitalism that has been now the rule of what's happening at the White House. And you're going to get your comeuppance. And you can say all you want about socialism. I can tell you right now that's not where the Democratic Party is. It's about building the middle class.
That escalated quickly. As
Glenn, I want to
popular leaders. The most popular leaders in the Democrat Party today.
I want to compliment you.
Are avowed socialists.
I want the most popular leader in the Republican Party has sold everything that's not nailed down. Take that ballroom and take everything that's going on with his kids, with what's Secretary of Commerce's kids, and with Witkoff kids. They are making money in this government, and you went into public service to serve good. And I compliment you.
And so did you. And so did you. And now you're sitting here defending a party that wants to have
socialism. And you did not walk out. You did not walk out $4 billion richer.
Rahm, you may have a point, but
this is why. Let me just begin.
You are deflecting. I think it's there is. You do have. Look, I live in New York City, the Socialist Republic of New York City. Thank you very much for that. You know, we've seen it. You talked about Mikey Sherrill, the candidate to replace Mikey Sherrill in Congress. Very much in the Zoran Mamdani AOC mold. That seems to be where you ask you poll people. Democrats seem to like these.
Mikey Sherrill ran in a 5-person field, and there was the mayor of Newark, the mayor of Jersey City, the president of the teachers union. She won the nomination. Another person, the congressman. 50% of the electorate of the new Democratic primary, where you had multiple choices, was the 2 most conservative members. That was also true in Virginia and Northern Virginia to replace Jerry Connolly. 11 candidates, 1 got 59, the most conservative member. So I actually reject, and if you looked at Manhattan Institute, your paper wrote about this. Manhattan Institute does a poll of Democratic primary voters.
Most people don't spend their days tracking legislation or following political panels. They're working, raising kids, paying bills, and doing what they need to do to keep things moving. So when it comes to politics, they do something completely reasonable. They trust that the person they voted for is going to do what they said they were going to do. That's not naive. That's the whole deal. You make promises, people give you their vote, you get in office, you do what you said. That's it. That's the agreement. But what keeps happening, and I mean keeps happening, cycle after cycle, city after city, state after state, is that people vote for someone who sounds like a practical, common sense problem solver on a campaign trail. And then the second they get the keys, they become a completely different person. Not a little different, not I had to adjust my approach because of new information different. We're talking about the exact opposite of what they told you they were going to do. And the clearest, most recent example of this, the one Glenn Youngkin put directly in Rahm Emanuel's face at this conference, is Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. Let's continue.
Reject, and if you looked at Manhattan Institute, your paper wrote about this. Manhattan Institute does a poll of Democratic primary voters. Literally 50% describe themselves as moderate. I know where the noise is, but I also know where the voters are, and it's not the same.
So if I can, first of all, one thing that I believe is that the challenge we have in politics today is you can't have a discussion without someone unable to wait until it's their turn. And so just wait until I finish. And I will respect your time, and you can respect mine, because that's the way we should treat each other as Americans and as folks that do respect the service that you've had. So I firmly believe that what is happening today in the Democratic Party, and I've watched it happen up close in Virginia, is an effort to present as a moderate, because that's what Americans want. They want practical, common sense solutions that make sense in their lives. And yet, what we saw in Virginia was someone who presented themselves that way and then turned around immediately and literally enacted policy decisions that she had said on the road she would not do. And that's why she is the lowest rated from a favorable standpoint governor in modern Virginia history, because she told people that she had no interest in redistricting. She told people that she was going to work to bring costs down and make things more affordable. And the first actions she took were the exact opposite. And that is the issue today, which is I firmly believe that the challenges that we see with favorability in the Democratic Party, and as we said earlier, there are challenges in the Republican Party as well, but that challenge in the Democratic Party, I firmly believe, is rested in the fact that it is a party that is moving strongly to the socialist side of things, is presenting itself as moderate, and there are no moderates in the Democratic Party today who are winning. It's just that simple. Who, by the way, they may win at a ballot box, but when they start leading and serving, they are demonstrating something very different.
All right, Rahm, we've got a little more time than on the clock, I was told, because it was such a fascinating conversation. So, but respond to that, Rahm, and then I do want to get on to at least one subject of policy.
Let me just say this on the redistricting. This all started in Texas.
It's not true.
Well, I respected the respect part, didn't I?
I got it. I'm going to bite my tongue. My wife would have yelled at me by now. So
well, let me do it for her.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. She's not here, so let me handle it for
okay.
you. Okay. Yeah. In fact, let's start with our pillow talk. I'm not too happy about this marriage anyway.
Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry.
We never
Why don't we keep getting back to the bedroom?
That may say a lot about the two of us. So number one, redistricting has been started here in a way, and I'm watching China. They're working on research. We're working on redistricting. We're working on ballrooms, and they're working on bullet trains. This is you can sit there and say this. Do we have challenges on our party? I was there before you were there. Now,
Trust
be
me,
quiet, be quiet.
I was doing something else.
Governor, I did respect you.
You did.
I respected your minutes,
I wasn't.
and I didn't interrupt. I'm asking for equal time here.
Got it.
Okay. Number two, that I understand your desire. You want to say that about socialism, et cetera, you got one mayor, and that is it. It doesn't define a party. I got many more senators, many more congressmen, many more governors who have actually, your colleagues that you used to work with, who are actually doing sensible policies, growing their economies, and et cetera. You will not defend, because I know you as a character person, you believe in actually the free market. That is not what's going on in this country. What's going on in this country is we're using a type of crony capitalism and corruption to define a political system. That is both true on the tariffs. It is true on how contracts are laid in the Pentagon. It is true of how they have been rewarding, penalizing, and it's hampering the economy. Okay. Now, I happen to think we have a challenge on our party, and the real challenges aren't ideological.
All right.
When you look at the last 25 years, the challenges for both parties is the establishment versus the anti-establishment.
Okay, look, you both.
That's not true at all, family. The battle with Democrats happens to be very much socialism. Don't take my word for it. I'll show you guys right about now.
I'm not really surprised that Kathy Hochul decided to, in fact, endorse Rahm Emanuel, because the fact is, socialism is not a four-letter word in Democratic primaries, not among Democratic voters. It's a five-letter word in the minds of a lot of Democrats, that five-letter word being great. Look at this. Net popularity of socialism among Democrats. You go back to 2010, it was plus 7 points. Look how high it is now, up like a rocket, up to plus 36 points. That's a jump of nearly 30 points on the net popularity scale among Democrats in just 15 years. And I was looking at the polling from New York City, and what you see is the clear plurality of New York City Democrats think the idea of having a socialist mayor is a good idea, matching what we see nationally. The bottom line is socialism isn't a dirty word among Democrats at this particular point. It's actually a word that, when attached, Democrats seem to like it.
That's a huge jump, and that's not that long ago, let me add.
No.
What about capitalism?
Yeah, okay, so if all of a sudden socialism is now a five-letter word, great. What I would say is capitalism in the mind of Democrats is a three-letter word, bad. What are we talking about? Net popularity of socialism among Democrats. Look at this trend. It was plus 8 points in 2010 on the positive side of the ledger. Look at where we are in 2025. Down. Falling through the floor at minus 13 points. That's a drop of over 20 points in just 15 years. So we see the exact opposite trend that we see at socialism, which is up and away. What we see with capitalism is down, down, down through the floor.
Okay, we're talking about Democrats here. What about if you look at the larger population, Harry? Is it the same type of thing?
This is where the danger is for Democrats, because if socialism plays in Democratic primaries, it does not play in the general electorate. What do we see going on here? Net popularity among all adults. Capitalism is on the positive side of the ledger at plus 12 points. Socialism way, way, way underwater at minus 18 points.
There you have it, family. So Rahm Emanuel is actually not saying the truth about socialism actually being a thing within the Democratic Party because he's a Democrat. Now, and I did mention about Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, put directly in Rahm Emanuel's face at the conference is Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. This woman ran as a moderate. She looked voters in the eye and told them that she had no interest in redistricting. Told them she was focused on bringing costs down and making life more affordable for working people. That was the pitch. That's what she sold. And then the moment she got into office, her first moves were the exact opposite of both of those things. Not a misunderstanding, not a situation where something unexpected came up and she had to make a hard call. She said one thing to get the job, got the job, and then did the other thing, such as also raising a grocery list of taxes on top of a tax, a walking your dog tax that exists. And now she's the lowest rated governor in modern Virginian history. Because voters aren't stupid. They remember what you said. Think about it in the most basic common sense terms possible. If you hire a contractor to fix your roof, and if he shows up and starts tearing down your walls, you don't call him back. You don't care how good his pitch sounded when he knocked on your door. You don't care how reasonable he seemed when he gave you the estimate. He showed you what he actually is, and that's the only information that matters now. That's exactly where a massive chunk of voters across this country are right now. Not because they gave up on politics, but because they've been burned enough times to stop trusting the pitch. The word moderate has been recycled as a marketing label so many times that it doesn't mean anything anymore. It just means I want to win. You can call yourself moderate all day long. The only thing that tells you anything real is what happens after the inauguration. What gets signed, what gets cut, who benefits, and who ends up holding the bill. Because it's not a left versus right conversation at its core. It's a much simpler question than that. Did you do what you said? Did your decisions actually make life better for the people who put you there? Regular people aren't grading on a curve anymore. They're just asking whether the deal they thought they made is the deal they actually got. And when the answer keeps coming back no, the frustration stops being about policy and starts being about something much more fundamental. Being lied to by someone who needed your vote to get power and then didn't need you anymore once they had it. And that's the frustration you're watching in this clip. And if you see that and you understand that, then it's clear as day what's happening. So the Milken Institute Global Conference, if you never heard of it, that's kind of the point. This isn't a town hall. Nobody there is debating whether to fix the car this month or let the registration slide another 30 days. It's a gathering of executives, political heavyweights, and media figures, and the kind of people who fly in for a panel discussion about economic hardship and fly back out to their second home the same evening. That's not a criticism of the people in the room. That's just the context you need to understand why what happened here actually matters. Because inside that room, Glenn Youngkin says something out loud that a lot of millions of people have been saying at their kitchen tables for years. He pointed out the blue run cities have just as much of an affordability problem as everywhere else in the country, and that's a significant chunk of it is self-inflicted. Regulations that driven up the cost of construction, restrictions that made it harder to open a business without jumping through expensive hoops first, political priorities that end up protecting the system more than the people the system was built to serve, and none of that is a radical statement. That's just looking at the numbers. And Rahm Emanuel's response isn't a counter argument. There's no data walking back Youngkin's point. No, here's what we actually did in Chicago, and here's the result. What you get instead is deflection, pivoting to other topics, talking over the person and changing the subject repeatedly, and a lot of visible frustration you see from Rahm Emanuel. And then he pivots to corruption. He wants to talk about the Trump family making money while Trump is in office.
Less ideological.
All right. And let's talk about that, because let's be honest. Let's talk about it honestly, because there's a version of this conversation that actually makes sense, and there's a version that's just a distraction from the question Youngkin asks. Here's the common sense way to think about it. When someone does business in the open, where everyone can see the play, that's business. When someone does business behind closed doors, using a title they didn't earn and connections they only had because of who their dad is, that's a fix. Hunter Biden had no background in energy, never worked a day in the oil industry, and yet somehow he ended up on the board of a Ukrainian energy company. I can't even say it. Boruzma, pulling in over $80,000 a month, while his father was the sitting vice president of the United States, actively involved in Ukraine foreign policy. Joe Biden at the time. That's not business. That's a door that only opens from the inside. And the only key that unlocks it is your last name and who your father's on the phone with. Nobody outside that arrangement got to participate in that. Regular people didn't get a cut of that. It happened behind closed doors, was denied when questioned, and the people asking questions were called conspiracy theorists, right up until a congressional investigation confirmed what everyone else suspected. Now, contrast that with the complaint Rahm Emanuel is making. The Trump kids were businessmen before their father became president. They were doing deals before he ever in office. They kept doing deals after. You could disagree with that. You can think there should be stricter rules around it. That's a legitimate conversation. But the difference between the two situations is that one was hidden and one wasn't. One required you to lie about it for years, and one was just sitting there in the open where anyone could see it. And here's the thing regular people actually understand about that distinction. When the play is visible, you can make your own call. When Trump said to buy after when Trump said to buy after Liberation Day, that wasn't a secret whisper to a board member at a private dinner. That was said out loud on record where anyone paying attention can act on it. I'd rather participate in a system where the moves are visible than watch a system where the moves happen in private and only certain people with the right last name or the right donor relationship get the benefit. That's not complicated. That's just common sense. Now, and I want to be fair here because Rahm Emanuel isn't a nobody. He was a mayor of Chicago for 6 years. He was Barack Obama's chief of staff. He's been at the center of Democratic politics for decades. And there are real conversations happening right now about whether he's the person to reposition the party heading into 2028. The experience, practical adult in the room alternative. That's a real lane he's trying to occupy. But here's the problem with that lane. If someone at a panel asks you a direct question about outcomes in cities you help run, and your response is to immediately pivot to what the other side is doing wrong, you communicated something important. Not with your words, with your body language, your energy, and the fact that you went three different directions instead of addressing what was actually asked. Most people recognize that move. They've seen it from a boss, a coworker, a family member. You know what it looks like when someone is managing the conversation instead of answering it. And managing the conversation, keeping the discussion away from the specific uncomfortable outcomes is exactly what the closed system does to protect itself. The real question that nobody in that room pressed, and I'll ask it here, is this. If the policies you championed and the governance that you represented produce the outcomes people are angry about right now, what exactly is being fixed by putting you back in the conversation? You can update the tone, you can appear at a different conference with a different posture, but the people paying the rent increases and watching their neighborhoods change in ways they did vote for, they're not experiencing the rebranding. They are experiencing the result. And that gap between the decision maker and the consequence is what this whole exchange is really about. And nowhere is that gap more visible or more damaging than in what happened to schools. Here's the number Glenn Youngkin dropped in this exchange that nobody in that room wanted to sit with. A black kid in Mississippi is 2.5 times more likely to be proficient in math and reading by fourth grade than a black kid in California. Read that again. I'll say it again for the people in the back. A black kid in Mississippi is 2.5 times more likely to be proficient in math and reading by fourth grade than a black kid in California. Now, it doesn't matter the race. I'm just using an example. I'm just saying an example. The whole point is the education difference, no matter the race. 2.5 times. Mississippi, the state Democrats have used as a shorthand for everything backwards and underfunded, is lapping California on basic literacy for black children, just speaking specific to my example, or children as a whole. And California, which spends more per student than almost anywhere else in the country, is somehow producing worse outcomes for the exact kids the party claims to care about most. So where is all that money going? It's not going to the kid in the back row who can't read, and it's going to the system built around that kid, the administrators, the consultants, the union contracts, the bureaucratic infrastructure that has to be fed first before anything reaches the classroom. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just the math. And during the pandemic, that same system made a choice that proved exactly whose interests it actually serves. Schools in major Democratic ran cities stayed closed long after the data stopped supporting it. Other countries had already reopened. States like Florida reopened earlier and didn't see the catastrophic outcomes that were being predicted. The science on transmission in schools, especially for younger kids, was available. What kept those classrooms empty wasn't the evidence. It was the teachers' unions who didn't want to go back to the in person instruction, and the politicians who depend on union money and union votes fell in line. That's the whole transaction right there. I'm speaking to the majority, not the minority. The union paid for access, the politicians delivered the policy, and the kids absorbed the cost. Think about who that decision actually landed on. If you were an essential worker, a nurse, a truck driver, someone stocking shelves, you couldn't do your job from a laptop. Your kid was sitting in front of a screen alone for months trying to learn from a video call while you were out the door at 6 in the morning. The families with the resources to hire tutors or a parent who could stay home and manage the schooling, those kids got through it. The kids who were already behind, the ones who needed the structure and the face-to-face with a teacher, the most fell the furthest because they had the least room to absorb any loss at all. The documented result of that choice was nearly 2 decades of academic progress erased in 2 years. Test scores collapsed, with students who never recovered. Schools are still trying to close gaps that widened during that stretch. And parents are still sitting in conferences wondering why that kid who was doing fine before all of this is now behind on material they should have cleared a long time ago. Nobody at the Milken Institute drove home to deal with that. Nobody on that panel that we just seen in this clip had to explain to their 10-year-old why reading is still hard. That's not their reality, so it didn't carry any weight in that room. But the question is the same one that cuts through every other part of this conversation. When a real choice had to be made between what the union wanted and what those kids needed, who won? Answer that honestly, and you already answered the bigger question about the whole system is actually who the whole system is actually built to protect. The education problem and the affordability problem aren't two separate conversations. They are the same conversation because both come down to one question. When something has to give, who absorbs the cost? And in both cases, the answer keeps being the same person, the regular working family that played by the rules and expected the system to hold up on its end. And the affordability crisis isn't a chart, it's putting something back on the shelf at the grocery store because you did the math in your head and the number didn't work. And it's a rent notice that $200 higher than last year with no explanation. It's looking at your utility bill and deciding whether to adjust the thermostat or just deal with it. And that's what this actually feels like, not a policy issue, a daily grind. And here's the common sense part that Youngkin said out loud. And I know a lot of Virginians, as it has been already expressed in the clip, that Virginia Abigail Spanberger ran as a moderate, sold you whatever she wanted you to hear so she can get in office, and obviously done the difference and basically done the very thing in which Democrat-led cities do, the ones that do sit there and run on one viewpoint just to get in office and act entirely different, in which working class families suffer and taxes are higher to the eyeballs, right? But Youngkin said out loud, and Emanuel never answered, a big chunk of that squeeze is coming directly from the rules that Blue Run cities wrote and kept on the books. Think about how rent actually goes up. If the rules make it expensive, slow, and legally complicated to build new housing, zoning restriction, permit delays, environmental reviews that take years, then less housing gets built. Less supply, same demand. Prices go up, That's not economics class. That's just how it works. Same thing with small businesses. If the city requires thousands of dollars in licensing fees and months of paperwork before you can legally open a shop before a single customer walks in, then fewer people start businesses. And when fewer people start businesses, there's less competition, which means the people already operating can charge more. Every layer of red tape has a price tag on it, and the person paying it isn't the city council member who voted it in. It's the renter. It's the person trying to start something from scratch. And it's the family that can't afford to stay in the city they grew up in. And the people writing those rules mostly don't live where the consequences land. A policy failure for them is a bad news cycle. Some uncomfortable press coverage for a week and then it moves on. And for the family getting priced out, it's not a news cycle. It's boxes in the living room and a moving truck and starting over somewhere cheaper because the numbers stopped working. That distance is exactly why nothing changes. You can't feel what you never had to live with. To admit the policy failed, you have to admit what it actually served, and the donors got their priorities. The unions got what they paid for, and the machine kept running. And the voter who showed up believed the pitch and cast the ballot, got the bill. Nobody says that out loud, which is why you get the pivot, the deflection, and the frustration you seen from Rahm Emanuel. In this exchange, trust doesn't collapse overnight. It drains out slowly, one broken promise at a time, until a new slogan doesn't move anyone. And there's a reason it feels like politicians are speaking a different language, and it's not complicated. Most people have a feedback loop, meaning if you make a bad call, you feel it. You lose the client, the rent comes due anyway, the kid brings home the report card, the consequence lands on you personally, and you adjust. That's the mechanism that keeps most people honest. But when your paycheck shows up, regardless of whether the policy work, when your kids go to private school while you're making decisions about the public one, when your neighborhood will never feel what the people in the affected zip code feel, that feedback loop just doesn't exist for you anymore. You stop getting the signal. Not because you stop caring. Maybe you genuinely believe your intentions are good, but because nothing in your actual daily life is telling you that you're wrong. And that's the thing about Rahm Emanuel in this clip. He ran Chicago for 6 years. Chicago has one of the most expensive dysfunctional school systems in the country, run by one of the most powerful teacher unions in the country, and the kids at the bottom of that system have been absorbing bad outcomes for years. Nobody pulled his paycheck over that. Now, I know Virginians are regretting and wish and missing Glenn Youngkin, who was the former governor before Abigail Spanberger, because Virginia were actually thriving before Abigail stepped in. But when it comes to Rahm Emanuel running Chicago for years, nobody showed up at his front door with the consequences. So when Glenn Youngkin asked a direct question about what blue governance actually produced, not in theory, but in measurable outcomes for real people, the response wasn't accountability, it was management. Pivot to Trump. Pivot to corruption. Redirect the room. Most people watching that recognize the move instantly because they've seen it before. A boss who derails a meeting the second it gets close to something he's responsible for. A landlord who turns a broken furnace into a lecture about the terms of your lease. You know exactly what you're watching when someone manages a conversation instead of answering it. And the frustration that comes with watching it isn't really political. It's personal. It's the frustration of recognizing that the person who should have the answer doesn't want to give it and has enough control of the room to make sure they don't have to. What 2024 made impossible to ignore is that voters across very different backgrounds in very different parts of the country moved in the same direction. And that kind of shift doesn't happen because people picked a new team. It happens when enough people see the management move for what it is and decide they're done pretending it's something else. None of this requires a policy background or a seat at a conference table. The standard is simple. Stop grading politicians on what they say they care about and start grading them on what actually happened. Not the intention, not the speech, not the panel appearance where they talked about passionately about working families before getting back in the car. What changed? Is housing more accessible in that city than it was 10 years ago? Are the kids coming out of the schools more prepared or less? Are working families staying, or are the people who built those neighborhoods being priced out while the people who made the decisions move somewhere the consequences don't reach? It's easier to start a business in the city than it was 5 years ago, or harder. Those aren't complicated questions. They are the same questions you ask before hiring anyone for anything that actually mattered to you. You wouldn't hire a contractor based on how good he sounds on the phone. You look at the last house he built and ask whether it's still standing. Apply that same standard to the people making decisions about your rent, your kid's school, and your ability to afford the city you live in, and apply it without apology, regardless of which party you're talking about. Because here's what that exchange at the Milken Institute actually showed. When someone who helped run a major American city for years get asked a direct question about what that governance produced, and they can't answer without immediately pivoting to what someone else did wrong, that's your answer. That's the result. The deflection is the omission. And the people watching from home, the ones paying the rent increases and checking their kids' test scores and trying to figure out why things feel harder than they used to, they already know it. They've known it for a while. The frustration isn't new from Rahm Emanuel that you just seen. What's new is how hard it's getting to pretend the gap isn't there. Drop a comment with your take. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. I'll see you in the next one, family. On that note, family. And also, let the love supersede the hate. Now, on that note, family, peace.